Germany has a new head coach. His name is Jurgen Klopp. And honestly, that part isn't even the biggest story making headlines right now. What's really got people talking is something Klopp said about the man he's replacing, Julian Nagelsmann, and a lot of fans think it was a low blow dressed up as a joke. Was it an innocent slip of the tongue, or was Klopp quietly campaigning for this job the whole time? That's the debate raging right now, and to answer it properly, you have to slow down and walk through exactly how we got here, because the timeline alone tells you most of the story. Start with the World Cup itself. Germany went in with Nagelsmann in the dugout, carrying real expectations after the progress he'd shown at Euro 2024. They came out early anyway. Round of 32, beaten by Paraguay on penalties 4-3, in a shootout that felt almost cruel given how the tournament had started. That's not just a bad night though. That's the third straight World Cup where Germany has gone home before the knockout rounds really got going, after group stage exits in both 2018 and 2022 that already had the whole country questioning where things had gone wrong. 4 days after that penalty shootout, Nagelsmann was already out of a job. 4 days. Think about that. The DFB, Germany's football federation, confirmed his exit on a Friday and in the same breath admitted they'd already been in contact with Klopp about taking over. This wasn't a slow, careful search for the next man. The federation president said it plainly: leadership would now open talks with Klopp, and Klopp had already signaled he was open to it. There was no shortlist. They went straight to their guy. And Klopp didn't play coy about it either. He was working the tournament as a pundit for Magenta TV, and when reporters asked, he just confirmed it. Julian had resigned, he said, and the federation was already working through a succession plan, and yes, they'd been in touch with him. Within days that turned from talks into an actual agreement. Transfer journalist Fabrizio Romano broke it to the football world: Klopp had accepted the job. The contract length and the messy business of exiting his Red Bull role were still being ironed out, but the headline was clear. Klopp was walking back into a dugout. So now you've got a national hero taking over the biggest job in German football, arguably the single most demanding coaching seat in the entire country's sporting landscape. And the obvious question everybody wants answered is this: what does Klopp actually think about the guy he just replaced? Because here's the thing, he hasn't been quiet about it. Long before this job was officially his, Klopp was already getting under Nagelsmann's skin in public. Rewind to earlier in the tournament. Klopp's sitting next to Thomas Müller on the Magenta TV panel, breaking down the lineup ahead of Germany's opener against Curacao. He makes a joke about being lucky that Nagelsmann is the one picking the team that day, then tacks on one extra word almost as an afterthought. Still, that single word blew up online within hours. Müller couldn't keep a straight face on air, telling Klopp they were only in June, and he was already acting like it was September. Everyone watching heard exactly what that meant, and nobody needed it spelled out any further. Klopp was already imagining himself back on the touchline, months before Nagelsmann had actually lost his job. That one word turned into the most talked about syllable in German football for an entire week, with fans and pundits debating endlessly whether Klopp was quietly, maybe even unconsciously, questioning whether Nagelsmann would even make it to the next tournament. It wasn't only fans arguing about it in comment sections either. Germany legend Lothar Matthäus went right at Klopp over it, saying the comment didn't exactly make Nagelsmann's job any easier. That's not a random ex-player throwing shade, remember, that's a World Cup winner calling out the incoming national coach before he even signed anything. Matthäus pushed further, asking how Klopp would have felt if some outside expert told him to bench a regular starter before a huge Champions League night, adding that kind of interference never goes down well between coaches, no matter how it's meant. Then there was Rudi Völler, the DFB's sporting director at the time, who ended up publicly shielding Nagelsmann from exactly this kind of pressure. He said everyone knew the nature of his relationship with Nagelsmann, that people had accused him for years of protecting him like a bodyguard, but that Nagelsmann didn't need protecting because he was still a genuinely top-level coach. Völler went further, insisting he personally believed Nagelsmann was probably still the right man to continue, while carefully admitting he wasn't the only one making that call for the federation. Notice how he phrased it, though. He's defending Nagelsmann while quietly acknowledging the decision was already slipping out of his hands. Then a third voice entered the chat, one you might not expect from a pure results reporter. A well-followed football journalist, Jonas Berner, posted right after the Paraguay loss, calling the exit brutal and embarrassing, out early for a third straight tournament in a row, and said that in his view only one man could save German football now, Jurgen Klopp. Different job, completely different perspective, yet somehow the same conclusion everyone kept landing on. So before Klopp had even taken the job, three completely different corners of German football were already talking about him and Nagelsmann in the same breath. A legend accusing him of overstepping. A federation official trying to protect Nagelsmann from him. And a major journalist basically begging Klopp to take over. That's the temperature this appointment landed in. Not calm. Not a smooth handover. A situation where Klopp had already been throwing elbows, whether he meant to or not, weeks before the job was ever officially his. To really understand why Klopp's comments cut so deep, you need to know who Julian Nagelsmann actually is and how short his time with Germany really was. He took over the national team in September 2023 after Hansi Flick was let go, becoming the second youngest head coach in the country's history at just 36 years old. Sit with that for a second. That's a young manager walking straight into one of the most scrutinized jobs on the planet, for a country that hadn't even won a single knockout match at a World Cup since lifting the trophy back in 2014. Before Germany, Nagelsmann had already made his name as one of the sharpest tactical minds in the Bundesliga, running Bayern Munich and RB Leipzig, and building a reputation as a coach who knew how to get the best out of young talent. That's exactly why the federation trusted him to rebuild a team that had crashed out of the group stage in both 2018 and 2022, two humiliations that still stung the whole country. And to give him credit where it's due, there were real signs of progress under him. Germany reached the quarterfinals of Euro 2024 on home soil before losing to Spain, who went on to win the whole thing. Not a trophy, but a genuine step in the right direction after years of disappointment. Then came this World Cup. Germany opened with a statement win, thrashing Curacao 7-1. On paper, that's the kind of scoreline that should have settled every nerve in the building and silenced every doubter. But people watching closely still sensed something wasn't quite right underneath the surface, even in a dominant performance like that. Eurosport Germany's Adriana Warren summed up the mood well, explaining that after the eventual Paraguay exit, plenty of fans and pundits felt real change was overdue, and that the early elimination only strengthened the growing sense that the national team badly needed a fresh start. That unease didn't just appear out of nowhere the moment Germany lost. Even during the big win over Curacao, sharp pundits were already flagging cracks underneath the scoreline. TalkSport's Kevin Hatchett pointed out during the tournament that yes, Nagelsmann had a contract running through the next Euros, but that serious questions were coming his way regardless, calling this German side fragile, and noting they'd pushed Spain all the way at the last Euros but had never once looked fully comfortable at this tournament. In other words, the warning signs were there in black and white before Paraguay ever came calling. Then Paraguay happened. A team nobody expected to trouble Germany knocked them out on penalties. Nagelsmann himself didn't try to spin it afterward. He said flatly that if you lose to Paraguay, you're simply not a first-class football team anymore, and that he was deeply disappointed. Days later, he was gone. Some reports called it a resignation, others framed it as pressure from the DFB board pushing him out. Either way, Germany's second youngest ever head coach was suddenly unemployed, just over 2 years into a job he'd been building toward Euro 2028 with. And into that vacancy walked the coach who'd already been poking at him for weeks, the very same coach fans had been chanting for online since the moment the tournament began. One account with over 1 million followers had already posted that there was only one man who could save German football, and his name was Jurgen Klopp. That's the backdrop here. A young manager who'd made genuine progress, undone by one bad night against Paraguay, replaced by the country's most beloved football figure, who'd already made his opinions known before the job even had an opening. Once Nagelsmann was actually gone, Klopp didn't dial anything back. If anything, his comments got sharper, even while sounding diplomatic on the surface. Right after the DFB confirmed the exit, Klopp stood in front of Magenta TV's cameras and walked through exactly how the conversation had unfolded. He explained his existing Red Bull contract, said he was usually someone who honored his commitments, but that he was genuinely interested in talks with the Federation, and that those talks would need to be serious ones, because the problems Germany had been having weren't down to Nagelsmann at all. He called Nagelsmann an extraordinary coach who'd get plenty more chances to prove it throughout his career. Read that carefully, though. Klopp is saying the collapse wasn't Nagelsmann's fault, while standing right there as the man ready to fix it anyway. It's praise wrapped tightly around an unspoken verdict. The team was broken. Nagelsmann, according to Klopp, wasn't the reason. But somebody still needed to walk in and rebuild it, and Klopp made it very clear he was volunteering for exactly that. He'd already tried to smooth things over once before, actually, which tells you how much his earlier comment had actually landed. After this moment blew up, Klopp approached Nagelsmann directly following the Curaçao win, telling him they were all on the same side, and joking that he'd apparently discovered the single most hated word in German football that year. He even said afterward he could have punched himself for letting it slip out live on television. Nagelsmann's response to that apology told its own story. He didn't warmly accept it. Asked about it before Germany's next match, he said flatly that he hadn't expected an apology from Klopp for his comments, and that he simply doesn't listen to everyone who talks about the national team, because that's just not possible for him to do. That's a man trying to look unbothered while clearly still irritated underneath. That same pattern, Klopp poking, Nagelsmann brushing it off, played out again the night of the Paraguay exit, when both men spoke publicly within hours of each other. Klopp, working the broadcast, was asked point-blank whether he'd consider stepping into the role. His answer managed to sound cautious and loaded at the exact same time. He said he understood his name comes up whenever people discuss the national coaching job, but that this wasn't the moment to talk about it, especially not with him. He referenced, without quite saying it outright, that both Nagelsmann and Völler had already made their own statements that same night, letting those comments do the talking instead of piling on himself. It's also worth knowing Klopp had been critical of German football's structure long before this tournament ever kicked off. He'd said in the past that player development in Germany ends far too early, that the system stops giving young players real chances and starts judging 18 and 19-year-olds before they've had a fair shot. That's a pointed structural critique, one that lands squarely on anyone who's run the program, Nagelsmann included. By the time the Paraguay exit happened, Klopp already had a long public paper trail, opinions on team selection, on development, on how the timing for his own return kept getting better. Every single one of those comments landed on a man who, at the time, was still actively fighting to keep his job. While all of this was unfolding around Nagelsmann, Klopp's own path was moving just as quickly behind the scenes, even if most people weren't paying attention to it yet. To understand why he was even in a position to weigh in on Germany's setup at all, you need the backstory. Klopp left Liverpool at the end of the 2023-24 season, walking away from a club he'd spent 9 years completely transforming. He said at the time he simply had no energy left for even one more year in that role, that the tank was empty after everything Anfield had asked of him. From there, he took a role overseeing Red Bull's global football operations starting in January 2025, giving him a bird's-eye view across an entire network of clubs, minus the touchline stress of actual match-day coaching. It sounded, on paper, like the perfect soft landing for a burnout manager. That role also kept him visible and connected to the game rather than disappearing entirely, which is exactly why he ended up on a broadcast panel at this World Cup in the first place, sitting right next to Müller, making the very comments that sparked all this friction in the first place. Throughout the tournament, Klopp kept suggesting the door back to coaching wasn't fully shut, even while insisting he wasn't actively chasing anything. Asked mid-tournament if he'd take the Germany job, he gave a careful non-answer, saying he hadn't even thought about it yet. But reporting behind the scenes told a different story, suggesting Klopp privately wanted to experience coaching at a World Cup and had harbored real ambitions of taking the job. Once it actually opened, Klopp stopped playing it cool. He confirmed the timing was about as good as it was ever going to get, adding that while things weren't perfect because of his existing Red Bull contract, it was still the best opportunity he'd had since walking away from Liverpool, and that he finally felt recharged. The one real obstacle left standing in his way was Red Bull itself. Klopp made clear, publicly, that he wasn't simply going to walk out on that contract without handling it the right way, the way plenty of coaches in his position might have been tempted to do. He said he needed to speak directly with Oliver Mintzlaff, his actual employer there, laying out exactly where things stood between them, saying he generally honors his contracts as a matter of personal principle but had already made his interest in the DFB talks unmistakably clear, and that he assumed Mintzlaff wouldn't stand in his way after 19 genuinely intense months working together. Ideally, he said, everyone comes out of this situation clean, with no hard feelings on either side. That's Klopp threading a needle, loyal to the people who gave him a soft landing after Liverpool, but honest that his priorities had shifted the moment the national job opened up. And once that door cracked open, everything moved incredibly fast. Romano's reporting laid out how quickly the pieces fell into place, confirming Klopp had accepted the move even while contract length and his Red Bull exit were still being finalized behind closed doors. Red Bull's own succession scramble tells you exactly how rushed this all was on their end too. The company had reportedly lined up Oliver Glasner to replace Klopp in that global soccer role, only for Glasner to sign with Nottingham Forest instead, forcing Red Bull to restart their entire search from scratch, almost overnight. This wasn't a company with months to prepare a graceful exit plan. It was a company scrambling to fill a hole that opened up within a matter of days, right as one of their most high-profile executives was walking out the door. So from Paraguay's win, to Nagelsmann's exit, to the Federation's approach, to Red Bull's scramble, the entire chain of events played out in barely more than a week. Football rarely moves this fast, especially not for a job this big. So where does that leave things now? Klopp isn't stepping into some ceremonial figurehead role. According to the reporting around his arrival, the Federation is handing him real control over how the entire national team operation runs, including a full restructuring of the youth development pathways and a shift in playing style to match his high-intensity approach. That youth overhaul lines up exactly with the criticism Klopp had been voicing for years about German football cutting young players loose too soon. He's not just complaining about it from a broadcast booth anymore. He's the guy with the actual authority to fix it. Part of the plan reportedly involves reuniting with familiar faces, including former Liverpool assistant Pep Lijnders, who became available after leaving Manchester City. That's Klopp doing what he's always done, surrounding himself with people he trusts rather than inheriting a staff built by someone else's vision. And then there's the player everyone's genuinely watching closely here, Florian Wirtz, who Klopp will now get to work with directly at international level after Wirtz's big money move to Liverpool hasn't quite clicked the way people expected it to. That relationship alone could end up being crucial in reviving a German side that's clearly lacked cohesion and identity across recent major tournaments. The overall mood around the appointment, according to people closely following German football day to day, is mostly relief mixed with genuine excitement. Warren put it simply, the dominant feeling right now is excitement, and Klopp remains one of the most respected figures in the country's football, seen as someone who can restore belief in a team that's badly lost its way. Other names had been floated before Klopp became the obvious, almost inevitable choice, including Oliver Glasner, Sebastian Hoeneß, Fabian Hürzeler, and Christian Streich, but none of them carried Klopp's rare combination of experience, silverware, leadership, and genuine public support. None of them, either, had his track record of turning around clubs that had completely lost their identity, the way he did at both Borussia Dortmund and Liverpool. He brought Liverpool back to the very top table of world football after a genuinely difficult stretch that had left the club drifting for years. And at Dortmund, years earlier, he delivered the club's first ever Bundesliga title, turning a mid-table side into champions almost by sheer force of personality and pressing football. Still, there are legitimate questions worth asking about whether that kind of club-level magic actually translates to international management, where he won't have his players on the training ground every single day the way he did at Anfield or Signal Iduna Park. Warren flagged this directly, pointing out that only two managers in the entire history of the sport, Marcelo Lippi and Vicente Del Bosque, have ever won both a men's World Cup and a men's Champions League. That's the extremely exclusive club Klopp is now effectively being asked to try and join, and it's a much harder trick to pull off than winning either trophy alone. But she also argued Klopp has tools beyond pure tactics to make it work, noting that while daily training ground development is harder to replicate at international level, his influence goes well beyond that anyway. He commands enormous respect and has repeatedly shown he can unite a group of players around a single goal. As for Nagelsmann, where he goes next isn't clear yet. What is clear is that this closes a chapter that started with genuine promise. A young coach handed a broken program who dragged Germany to a Euros quarterfinal, only to be undone by one night against Paraguay that he himself admitted exposed exactly how far the team had actually fallen. And Klopp steps into that mess having already said, on camera, in public, more than once, exactly what he thought was wrong with it, before he ever had the authority to fix any of it. Now he has that authority. The Federation handed him the keys, the players, the staff, and the mandate to rebuild the entire pipeline he'd spent years criticizing. Whether that turns into another trophy the way Dortmund and Liverpool did remains to be seen, and honestly, nobody can promise you that outcome, not even Klopp himself. International football is a different beast entirely, less training ground time, more waiting between camps, and a lot less room to fix things gradually the way he could at club level. What isn't in question, though, is how he got here, replacing a coach he'd already been publicly needling for weeks, walking into a job that opened up faster than almost anyone in German football expected, and inheriting a squad that even its own former manager admitted, out loud, wasn't first class anymore. That's the story so far. What happens next with Wirtz, with the youth setup, with the legends still weighing in from the sidelines, and with Germany's push toward the next Euros, that's the next chapter entirely. And it starts right now, with Jurgen Klopp finally back where everyone suspected he wanted to be all along, on the touchline.